Hello everyone, viewers. We all know the story. An apple falls from a tree. A young man named Isaac Newton watches it, and in a flash of brilliant insight, the laws of gravity are born. It's a clean, simple story of genius. It's the story we're all told in school. It defines the man who laid the very foundations of modern science, the rational mind that saw the universe as a grand, predictable clockwork machine. Not a complete lie, but a beautifully curated piece of public relations that hides a much darker, stranger, and more obsessive truth. What if I told you that for every hour Isaac Newton spent on physics and mathematics, he spent 10 hours locked away in secret, hunched over ancient, forbidden texts, breathing in the toxic fumes of mercury and antimony, chasing a knowledge so profound he believed it was the science Isaac Newton dedicated his life to. The secret that consumed him for over 30 years was a hunt for something far more powerful. The philosopher's stone, the key to biblical prophecy, and the lost divine language of creation. This isn't the story of a scientist. This is the story of the last magician. The story begins not in a bright orchard, but in the shadow, a room filled with the acrid smells of sulfur and acids, its surfaces coated in a fine layer of soot from a furnace that never went out. This was Newton's laboratory, but it wasn't a laboratory as we know it today, filled with pristine glassware and measuring instruments. It was an alchemist's den, a crucible of secrets. For Newton, this was the holiest of holies, a place where he could peel back the skin of the physical world to reveal the living, breathing spirit he knew was hiding underneath. While his colleagues at the Royal Society debated optics and planetary motion, Newton was wrestling with far more ancient and dangerous questions. He wasn't just mixing chemicals, he was trying to resurrect them. He believed that matter wasn't dead. They lived a slow, secret life deep within the earth, aspiring towards perfection, towards gold. This was the central creed of alchemy. It wasn't about greed, not for Newton. It was about philosophy. It was about gnosis, a divine, secret knowledge. He believed that if he could understand and accelerate this natural process of metallic growth in his furnace, he could do more than create. He was chasing the vegetable spirit, a mysterious animating force that he believed flowed through all things, connecting the stars above to the metals below. This was the heart of his quest, to find a single unified theory that explained everything, not just gravity and light, but life, God, and the ultimate destiny of humankind. He believed this knowledge had once existed, a perfect knowledge given to humanity in the beginning, to figures like Adam, Moses, and Pythagoras, but which had been corrupted and scattered over time, hidden away in myths, ancient architecture, and the cryptic language of alchemy. Newton saw himself not as an inventor, but as a rediscoverer, a sacred detective piecing together God's fragmented blueprint. He collected one of the largest private libraries in England, and it wasn't filled with books on physics. It was crammed with the works of alchemists, mystics, and church heretics. He painstakingly copied out recipes and treatises by hand, hundreds of thousands of words, convinced that within their allegorical language, their talk of green lions, red kings, and grey wolves, lay the encoded instructions for creation itself. He was living them. Eyewitness accounts from his assistant describe a man possessed. He would work for weeks on end without proper sleep, the fire in his furnace burning hotter than his desire for food or rest. His face would be blackened with soot, his eyes wild with a terrifying intensity. He would forget to eat, his meals left untouched on a tray outside his locked door. He was a man, but to truly understand what drove this man to the brink, we have to go back to a time of darkness and isolation, a time when the world outside his window seemed to be ending. We have to go back to the Great Plague in 1665, a terrible pestilence swept through England. The cities emptied, Cambridge University shut its doors, sending its students home to wait out the storm. A young, unknown Isaac Newton, this period is famously known as his Year of Wonders. It is where the apple story comes from. It's where he supposedly laid the groundwork for his theories on optics, calculus, and universal gravitation, all while sitting in quiet, rustic contemplation. But that is only half the story. The truth is, Woolsthorpe was not a peaceful retreat for Newton. It was a pressure cooker. He was The plague was a spectre haunting the countryside, a grim reminder of the fragility of life and the awesome, terrifying power of God. This experience forged Newton's world view. He saw the world not as a stable, orderly place, but as one governed by sudden, cataclysmic divine interventions. The universe wasn't just a clock, it was a drama. This conviction was rooted in a childhood marked by trauma and a feeling of abandonment. Born prematurely, so small he could fit in a quart pot. Newton wasn't expected to survive. His father died before he was born. When he was 3, his mother remarried and left him in the care of his grandmother. He grew up a solitary, introverted, and fiercely independent boy, prone to rage and He felt a profound connection to the prophets of the Old Testament, men like Moses and Elijah who spoke directly with God, away from the corrupting influence of society. In the isolation of Woolsthorpe, surrounded by his books and his thoughts, this feeling intensified. He wasn't just solving mathematical problems, he was beginning his true life's work, a solitary quest to understand the mind of God. He started to believe that the physical world was a riddle, a divine text written in the language of mathematics and alchemy. Gravity wasn't just a force, it was an expression of God's constant active will, the divine sensorium through which God perceived and governed the cosmos. And if the physical world was one of God's books, there was another, the Bible. And Newton became convinced that this book, too, was a code. So, back in his secret lab at Cambridge, his quest split into 2 parallel obsessions. One was alchemy, the attempt to decode God's book of nature. The other was prophecy, the attempt to decode God's book of scripture, and for Newton, they were not separate pursuits. They were 2 paths to the same ultimate truth. His alchemical work was incredibly dangerous. He worked with materials we now know are lethally. The alchemists called it mercury, the trickster god, a substance that was both a metal and a liquid, a spirit and a body. Newton was obsessed with it. He would heat it in sealed flasks for weeks, months at a time, watching as it changed color, believing he was witnessing the fundamental stages of creation. He sought to create what was called a philosophical mercury, a living, active version of the metal that could. One of his most important guides in this perilous journey was a man he never met, an American alchemist writing under the pseudonym Irenaeus Phileas, whose real name was George Starkey. Starkey's texts were considered some of the clearest and most practical alchemical writings ever produced, and Newton devoured them. He copied Starkey's recipes verbatim, trying to replicate his success. One such process involved creating a star regulus of antimony, a beautiful crystalline structure formed by purifying antimony with iron for Newton. This wasn't just chemistry, it was a revelation. The star pattern, he believed, was a sign, a fingerprint of the cosmic forces locked within the metal, a clue that he was on the right path. But the path was fraught with failure and frustration. Glass retorts would explode, releasing poisonous fumes. Months of painstaking work would result in nothing but a black, useless sludge, the alchemists called the crow's head, the symbol of putrefaction and failure. Yet Newton was undeterred. Each failure was just another part of the process. He believed that to achieve the final stage of the great work, the creation of the Philosopher's Stone, he, the alchemist, had to undergo a parallel spiritual purification. He had to be worthy of the knowledge, and so he lived an austere, almost monastic life. He was notoriously secretive, paranoid that others would steal his work. He wrote his most sensitive alchemical notes in a private. He was in a race, but his only competitor was time, and the forces of corruption he saw all around him. He believed history was a process of decay. Humanity was drifting further and further from the original truth of the Fabrica Sapientia, for he had to recover it before it was lost forever. This sense of urgency fueled the other half of his secret life, his obsession with biblical prophecy. If alchemy could Newton didn't read the Bible as a book of faith. He read it as a cryptogram, a divine puzzle box. He learned Hebrew and studied ancient Jewish mysticism, believing that the exact dimensions of Solomon's temple, as described in the book of Ezekiel, were a blueprint of the universe and a key to decoding the future. He filled millions of words, more than he ever wrote on science and math combined, with meticulous, obsessive calculations. He cross-referenced genealogies, analyzed prophetic verses, and tried to create a definitive timeline of all of history, from creation to the final judgment. His primary target was the Book of Daniel and the Book of Revelation. He saw them not as metaphors. He was looking for a date, the date of the apocalypse. He wasn't doing this out of morbid curiosity for Newton. It was a sacred duty. He believed he was living in the end times and that he had been chosen by God to decipher the warnings. And at the heart of his theological research was a belief so dangerous, so heretical, that it could have destroyed him utterly if it ever became public. Isaac Newton, the icon of English Protestantism, he believed that the concept of the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit as one God, was a corruption, a great apostasy that had been forced upon the Church in the 4th century. He saw it as a form of idolatry, the ultimate blasphemy. This was the great evil that the prophecies warned of, and he dedicated thousands of pages to trying to prove it, tracing the corruption of Scripture back to its source. To hold a fellowship at Trinity College, he was required to be an ordained Anglican priest, which meant publicly affirming his belief in the Trinity. This was a crisis point. He could not, in good conscience, take the holy orders. It would have meant living a lie. He was on the verge of having to resign his position, to abandon the very place that gave him the freedom to conduct his secret research. In a twist of fate, he managed to secure a royal dispensation from King Charles II, exempting him from the requirement. His secret remained safe, but the experience solidified his paranoia and his sense of isolation. He was truly alone, guarding a truth he believed could save the world, but which the world would crucify him for. This is where the story gets really interesting, because while Newton was a solitary, he was part of a network, a so-called invisible college of thinkers who were blurring the lines between the new, emerging science and the old, esoteric traditions. The Royal Society, which Newton would one day lead, was filled with men who shared his secret interests. Robert Boyle, the father of modern chemistry, was also a dedicated alchemist who spent a fortune trying to create the Philosopher's Stone. Elias Ashmole, the founder of the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford, was an astrologer and a Freemason. These men were walking a tightrope. Publicly, they were champions of reason and empirical evidence. Privately, they were immersed in a world of ancient wisdom, secret societies, and hermetic philosophy. They communicated in letters, often using codes and allegories, sharing knowledge while trying to avoid It was associated with con artists and fraudsters who promised to make gold for rich patrons only to disappear with their money. It was also viewed with deep suspicion by the Church as a form of black magic, a demonic attempt to usurp God's creative power. Newton had to be incredibly careful. He was building a reputation as England's preeminent natural philosopher. Any hint of his unorthodox pursuit, there was a constant tension between his public life and his private obsession, between the Newton who debated the nature of light and the Newton who tried to conjure the green lion in his laboratory furnace. The pressure was immense, and eventually something had to break. For 30 years, Newton pushed himself to the absolute limits of human endurance, both mentally and physically. He slept little, ate. He was wrestling with concepts that no mind had ever fully grasped, trying to hold the entire cosmos, from the smallest atom to the grand sweep of divine history, within his singular intellect. In 1693, it all came crashing down. Newton suffered a complete and terrifying mental breakdown. He stopped working. He couldn't eat or sleep. He descended into a state of profound paranoia, and he wrote bizarre, accusatory letters to his closest friends, the philosopher John Locke and the diarist Samuel Pepys, accusing them of trying to embroil him with women and betraying him. His letter to Locke was chilling. Being of opinion that you have endeavoured to embroil me with woman, and by other means I was so much affected with it as that, when one told me you were sickly and would not live, I answered 'twere better if you were dead. To Pepys, he wrote, that he would neither see you nor the rest of my friends any more. His friends were horrified. They thought he had gone mad for over a year. Newton was lost in this black melancholy. The official explanation, the one that history has settled on, is that he was suffering from mercury poisoning. Decades of inhaling toxic fumes had finally taken their toll on his nervous system, and analysis of surviving samples of his hair has indeed shown dangerously high levels of mercury, lead, and other heavy metals. But was it just that? Or was it something more? Was this the breakdown of a man who had flown too close to the sun? Had he, in his relentless quest to decode the mind of God, finally seen something that his own mind could not handle? Did he, or worse, did he find an answer that was so terrifying, so contrary to the orderly universe he was trying to build, that it shattered his sanity? We can never know for sure. He was a man standing on the precipice between two worlds, the old world of magic, spirit, and divine intervention, and the new world of reason, mathematics, and mechanical laws. He tried to bridge them, to unify them. Perhaps this breakdown marks a profound turning point in Newton's life. If you find this hidden history as fascinating as we do, and want to support our journey into the forgotten corners of the past, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us immensely to keep bringing these stories to light. Now, let's get back to Newton's mysterious transformation. Slowly, painstakingly, he recovered. But he was After 1693, his alchemical experiments, the obsession that had consumed him for 3 decades, largely ceased. The fire in his laboratory furnace, the one he had kept burning day and night, was finally allowed to go out. It was as if a door in his mind had been slammed shut. He packed up his alchemical manuscripts, millions of words of research, and locked them away in a large chest. He turned his back on the crucible and the furnace, on the hunt for the divine language hidden in matter. Instead, he embraced the world he had once held at a distance. In 1696, he accepted a public position as Warden of the Royal Mint in London. It's one of the great, strange ironies of history. The man who had dedicated his life to the secret art of transmuting base metals into gold, now the ultimate alchemist, became the ultimate anti-alchemist. And he pursued this new role with the same terrifying, obsessive intensity he had applied to his secret work. He wasn't just a ceremonial figurehead. He became a detective, personally hunting down the counterfeiters and coiners who plagued London's underworld. He would go undercover in disguise into taverns and slums to gather evidence. He ruthlessly interrogated and prosecuted criminals, sending dozens to the gallows. It was a strange, brutal third act to his life. He had turned from decoding the mysteries of God to enforcing the laws of the king. He had moved from the solitude of his Cambridge laboratory to the bustling, corrupt heart of London. He became Sir Isaac Newton, President of the Royal Society, a revered national image of the rational Whig, wearing Patriarch of the Enlightenment, was complete. The secret magician was buried. But what happened to his secrets? That chest of papers, his true life's work, remained locked. After his death in 1727, his estate was examined. His scientific and mathematical papers were, of course, deemed priceless and preserved. But the other documents, the vast, sprawling archive of his alchemical, theological, and prophetic research, were a source of deep embarrassment. His successors, the guardians of his new rationalist legacy, looked at these papers with horror. They saw not genius but madness. They were declared not fit to be printed and were suppressed, hidden away from public view for more than 2. It wasn't until 1936 that these papers finally came to light, when they were sold at a Sotheby's auction. The economist John Maynard Keynes bought up many of them, and after studying them he delivered a shocking verdict. He declared that Newton was not the first of the age of reason. He was the last of the magicians, the last of the Babylonians and Sumerians, the last great mind which looked out at the visible and intellectual world. So we are left with a profound question. Did Newton fail? Did he abandon his quest for the philosopher's stone and the key to prophecy because he realized it was a dead end, a fantasy? Or is there another, more unsettling possibility? Did he, in some way, succeed? Did he discover something in his research, a secret so powerful or so dangerous that he decided the world was not ready for it? Did he lock it away not out of failure? This was a man who believed he had rediscovered the pristine wisdom of the ancients, a man who believed he could decode God's plan for the universe. If such a man found what he was looking for, would he publish it? Or would he, fearing the chaos it could unleash, bury it forever? The image of Newton the alchemist turned detective takes on a new light. Perhaps his work at the Mint wasn't a rejection of his old life. He had spent 30 years hunting the secrets of creation. He spent his last 30 years hunting criminals. Both were a hunt for a hidden truth. Both were an attempt to impose order on a chaotic world, whether that order was divine or civic. The story of Isaac Newton is not one story, but two. There is Newton the scientist, the public figure who gave us the laws of motion and a universe it gave us the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and the technological age we live in today. But then there is the other Newton, the secret Newton, the solitary, obsessive heretic who believed the universe was not a machine, but a divine mystery, an enchanted place filled with hidden spirits and active intelligences. This Newton didn't want to just describe the universe. He wanted to commune with it. He wanted to... We have chosen to remember the rational scientist and forget the magician, but maybe we have it backwards. Maybe the real driving force behind all of Newton's work, including his science, was this deeper mystical quest. Maybe his famous laws of physics were just a byproduct of his search for the laws of God. The apple falling from the tree wasn't just about gravity for Newton. It was a symbol of the fall of man, of a knowledge. And his entire life was a relentless, secret, and perhaps tragic attempt to put it all back together again. The secrets in his chest of papers are still being deciphered today. They reveal a mind more complex, more tormented, and infinitely more fascinating than the simple caricature we find in our textbooks. They show us that the birth of modern science wasn't a clean break from the past, but Isaac Newton stands as a monument to that contradiction. He was the man who banished magic from the universe, and the man who spent his entire life secretly trying to master it. And in that paradox, in the story of his forbidden science, lies a profound reminder that the history we think we know is often just the surface of a much deeper and much stranger reality. What other secrets did the giants of science keep hidden? What forbidden... The line between science and magic, between reason and obsession, is never as clear as we like to think. And perhaps the greatest minds are the ones who dare to walk that line, even if it drives them to the brink of madness. All right. That is all for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and give it a like to support us. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.